Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third workshop of our RFP Gym session. So we have some developers joining our workshop today. So I'm going to introduce myself again. My name is Yuning Liu. I'm an associate on the City Renewables Accelerator team at Rocky Mountain Institute. So I already met many of you virtually through the previous Off-site PPA cohort webinars. And I'm very happy that you all can join our RFP Gym session and keep moving forward in the renewable energy procurement process together. So the goal of this workshop is to understand how to write a scope of work in an off-site renewables PPA RFP, and to provide opportunity for cities and counties to get some insights directly from renewable energy developers. I'd like to thank Eric and Kat from Apex Clean Energy and Craig and Jared from Hecate Energy for joining our developer panel discussion today. Later, they will share their insights into how to write a scope of work for an off-site PPA project. During this workshop, we will cover the following topics. First, we will have a 10-minute presentation to introduce the top 8 things to include in the scope of work section. And next, we'll have a 30-minute developer panel discussion with Apex Clean Energy and Hecate Energy to talk about some do's and don'ts. Afterwards, you and your city or county colleagues will have 15 minutes to fill out the scope of work section in the RFP template. In the end, every city or county will report out their lessons learned. So let's jump to the presentation first. A scope of work essentially means what the selected developer must fulfill. There are usually 8 things you should consider when writing the scope of work section of an off-site PPA RFP. The first thing is size. For example, how many megawatts or megawatt hours per year are you requesting? The second is which renewable energy technology you would prefer. We will consider proposals that include storage. Locations are also important. Is there any specific area you want the project to be in? You should also specify whether you want a physical or virtual PPA as well in your scope of work. It's also crucial to tell proposers the range of acceptable operation start date and contract length. Some other important questions include if you would prefer a fixed or escalating rate, what mechanical availability you require, and what permits or approvals the project should secure. So there are 4 things I want to highlight among those top 8 items to include in a scope of work. The first one is about size. It is very critical to specify the acceptable range of the total size of renewable energy and associated RECs if you're seeking. Other than megawatts and annual megawatt hours, you can also mention the proportion of the total city or county load. Also remember to point out how many projects your local government will select. Here's an RFP example from the city of Philadelphia. So they were open to proposals that aggregate multiple projects to provide a more balanced and stable load curve. You can also show your interest in signing a PPA with other potential buyers if you want to purchase from a larger project. If your local government intends to acquire RECs from the output, you should also mention related information. The second thing I wanted to highlight was technology. An off-site PPA allows cities and counties to be open to one or multiple renewable energy technologies, including solar, wind, geothermal, wave, tidal, and biomass energy. For energy storage, you should specify if it's a mandatory requirement. For example, the city of Houston was open to any proposal that included energy storage systems, but they also mentioned that failure to include an energy storage component will not disqualify a proposal. Another thing I wanted to talk about was locations. So off-site PPAs have more geographic flexibility than on-site generation, but a project closer to a city or county can provide more local co-benefits. This flexibility requires cities and counties to specify their project location preferences. This is why some local governments show their strong preference on a certain ISO or RTO. Some local governments would like the projects to be as close to their cities or counties as possible. And some others prefer facilities located on one or more sites owned by the local government. PPA pricing structure is also a very important part of the scope of work section. There are two types of structures. One is escalating rate, the other is a flat rate. By using an escalator, developers can usually start the price lower. However, cities and counties must be aware. So if the PPA escalator is greater than the rate at which utility prices increase over time, the PPA price could conceivably be greater than the utility tariff in a few years. Just like this example from City of Denton's RFP, please specify if your local government has any preference on PPA pricing structure. If you prefer an escalating rate, remember to ask developers to propose an annual escalator. And this ends my presentation. I know some of you may have questions related to the scope of work. So we have invited speakers from two renewable energy development companies, Apex and Hecate, to answer all of your questions and share their experience. Before our developer panel discussion, I'd like everyone to type your questions on this blank slide using the text tool in the annotation feature. So if you go to the top of your screen, you can see view options and use a text tool to write down any questions you have for developers. And later we'll cluster those questions and ask developers in the next 30 minutes. Cool. Thank you, everyone. So next, we'll have our developers joining our panel discussion to talk about their insights about into how to write a scope of work and share their experience in reviewing or writing a RFP. So we'll give each developer speaker around 3 to 4 minutes to first introduce themselves and also share some of their key viewpoints about the scope of work. And after the introduction part, we'll have around 20 minutes to answer all the questions we collected through this whiteboard annotation. So Jared, do you want to start?
My name is Jared Wren. I'm a development associate with Hecate Energy. I've been with the company since 2014. I am based in Central Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio. My primary work in Hecate in the last couple of years has been to work on our Highland projects in southwestern Ohio. That is one of the location that we utilized in the city of Cincinnati. But in terms of RFP processes, as a developer, I've participated in and responded to RFPs on multiple continents with a variety of counterparties, municipalities, utilities, corporate off-takers. So I've had quite a bit of experience in this sort of general topic, but I'm happy to answer any questions or try to provide insight as it relates specifically to process. And I don't, in terms of my, a couple things I wanted to mention specifically, and as governmental institutions, I'll provide the following caveat. I realize oftentimes in your procurement processes, you're beholden to a specific set of processes that really have it outside of your control, largely in the way that you issue commercial contracts with potential counterparties in your city. So with that caveat, I would say as a developer, and when we look at RFPs, the process is, it can be cumbersome and can be streamlined. And the RFPs that are streamlined, in my experience, just lead to better discussions among all the groups involved, smoother negotiations with regard to commercial contracts, and just generally serves everybody much more efficiently. And so I would say that as you formulate RFP processes, the keep it simple is as best advice as I can provide from a developer standpoint. It makes everybody's life easier, but I realize that oftentimes you can only bake in so much of that into your process, given what you're required to do by your specific location. But I would say, that in terms of websites, ease of access, file formats that are consistent or as simple as possible, physical delivery of the RFP responses themselves, and those type of issues can really help everybody involved, achieve what, ultimately the goal of the RFP is, both in terms of the municipality, but also in the folks that are responding. So I'll kick it to Craig or whoever else on our Brady Bunch wall here wants to go. But I appreciate the opportunity to participate and to meet with you guys in this forum.
Thank you, Jared.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'm happy to take it if you'd like at this point in time. This is Craig Overmeyer with Hecate Energy. I'm the Vice President of Operations, and I've been with the company since 2013. One of the things with respect to putting out an RFP is it's an art. It's not a science. It's like writing any grant proposal. It's how much do you put in order to get the response that you want, but how much do you not put in order to lose your audience? And therefore, as you're starting out, I have a feeling that there is a desire to try and put as much information in as possible. And while that's okay, it muddies the water. Our objective is to try and understand what your objective is. Is it job creation? Okay, if you're just using renewable energy in an attempt to create jobs, tell us that. Tell us that up front. And do a little homework. Find out if your Public Utilities Commission is going to approve something that might be higher than the lowest rates available if we simply source from tier 1 suppliers wherever in the world we can access those items and give you the lowest cost project. Will your Public Utility Commission actually approve something higher than that if along with that comes the prospect of jobs? Many people make the assumption that an economic development package is the best way to approach things because it shows so many good things that can be done as a result of the renewable energy project. Oftentimes those projects either get rejected or they end up going back for further negotiation that sometimes yields a cost curve that isn't capable or isn't possible for the developer because you put the requirements of either local jobs or local equipment, but you want the pricing of best possible in the world. So start off with what the thing is that you really want. If what you really want is to achieve 15% of your load or your megawatt hours through renewable energy, that should be just right up front in the RFP. Our goal is, with this first RFP, to source 15% of our megawatt hours through this process. That will tell us, all right, if we're a developer and we think that 15% of your load, and let's use a 100 megawatt load, for instance, not in hours, but in size. If you're looking at 15%, it may actually be cheaper to do it at 20% of your load because of the system requirements to build that project. We might be able to use the size of 20 megawatts a lot easier than 15 and give you a much better price. So flexibility around what you're asking for and showing to the developer is also really helpful. One of the things that we have traditionally done at Hecate is we'll answer an RFP, but we'll also put a lot of responses in there to be discussed. Because when you look at that sheet of paper coming in, it's got a lot of very just objective questions that don't allow us to put our fingerprint of the last 20 plus years of experience on the project for you. So oftentimes our response is going to say, yes, we can probably achieve that, but we would like to discuss this with you further. We'll give an indicative price on that. That will show how that would, unfold over time, but it's going to be subject to certain things that we would mutually have to agree upon. And the last point I'll make then is that if we have the transparency of what you're trying to achieve, and you have a little bit of flexibility around what those goals are, that allows the developer to use some of their experience to hopefully give you the best possible project that's as close to what you have asked for, I think you're going to end up with a lot more responses that get shortlisted and give you a much better playing field to choose from than if you are really, really super specific about things and inflexible on those terms. So I'll just leave that as my first comments. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Craig. Okay, Eric.
Everyone, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Lots of thumbs up, great. I'm Eric Haug with Apex Clean Energy. We're a utility scale renewable energy development company based in Charlottesville, Virginia. I myself grew up in Virginia, so I'm excited to see a lot of Virginia cities represented here. I went to Virginia Tech as well, so go Hokies. I've been in the energy industry for a little over 10 years. I started in oil and gas actually in Texas and left about 5 years ago to join Apex. And since then, I've taken over leadership of our line of business that signs offtake agreements with mainly corporations, but underneath of the umbrella of corporate customers, we would also include new cities that are signing up for renewable energy goals, as well as university clients, so municipals, universities, corporates. Under that bucket, I think you all are in a unique position because cities have an immense amount of experience purchasing things, going through your processes and knowing how to comply with those processes. But at the same time, renewable energy purchasing is a relatively new field, and there's been a lot of lessons learned even since I joined Apex in 2015 around what makes for a successful purchase, what makes 5 years down the road the purchaser of that energy happy with the product that they got, and did they leave value on the table or did they take too much risk on. So a lot of what I think is important in designing your RFPs is to know what you want, know what you don't want, but also give enough flexibility to the developer. I think I'm now echoing some prior comments around being precise where you can, but being flexible to give us a chance to show you what we've got. One very quick example of that is that in 2016, Apex won an RFP with the US Army in Texas at Fort Hood, which is the largest garrison of military in the world for the United States. And the RFP specified that the Army was interested in an on-site solar project on the base, and that the purpose was to increase the resiliency in the case that there were grid outages or hacks or some other type of interruption. Well, when we looked at pricing solar in 2016, it was considerably more expensive than it is today. And so our response was completely non-compliant. It included an on-site solar project that we would build, but it also included 50 megawatts of wind from another wind farm that we were building about 150 miles north of the base. And by combining an on-site PPA that was physical with an off-site virtually settled or financial PPA, we were able to subsidize the price and make it much more attractive than a lot of the other offers they received. And in so doing, the Army asked us to actually be the provider of their physical electricity for all of the base. So we now schedule power from the wind farm, power from the solar, and power from the grid when those technologies aren't operating. And it created just a win-win for them in terms of getting something they didn't know they wanted, but because they didn't throw our bid out when they saw it was partially non-compliant, it gave us a chance to actually help everyone save a bit of money. And obviously we were very happy to win the business. So that's just one example of I think how telling us what you really want, but then being open to maybe some other things is always valuable from a process perspective. And the other piece that I would mention that I think is valuable for people in your positions is recognizing that there are stories to be told, or there are attributes for these purchases that go beyond, I saved $5 million over 15 years. It could be, I created jobs. It could be, I've secured through the developer funding for a 911 emergency service in a rural county. It could be a number of things. A lot of wind and solar farms have the unintended consequence in some cases of curtailing fossil fuel generators. And when they do that, we actually prevent or reduce the amount of water that's extracted from rivers and reservoirs as a result. So there are all kinds of environmental and economic benefits that, knowing what those are and identifying how your stakeholders at your cities will respond to those as being valuable is very helpful for us to know. So I'd encourage you to do a little bit of exploration there to tell us how we can provide the best product to you. Maybe I'll stop there and turn it back so that we can get to some Q&A. But thank you again for the invitation to speak to you today.
Thank you, Eric. Cool. So earlier we got a lot of questions around permits and approvals and all kinds of agreements that your developers should get for an off-site PPA project. So the questions I like to ask include what permits and approvals do developers usually need to apply for an obtain for off-site renewable energy projects? And also, do you utilize project labor agreements? What's your experience with non-disclosure agreements and all kinds of general conditions? So does anyone want to kick off the Q&A session?
Non-disclosure agreements are absolutely necessary. If we're providing some secret sauce, if we're trying to add value to your specific circumstances, there are certain things that generically we can translate from one project to another in our experience. But the specifics about what you have asked for and how we're proposing to solve that problem for you, it is really what we have to offer. It's our intellectual property. So even in an open process, the last thing we want to see is, until we're selected and our proposal has to go in front of a utility commission for its approval, do we want to see kind of our approach shopped or put out in front of our competitors in the marketplace, because we might be doing some things that allow us to lower the cost that others haven't necessarily thought of. That comes from experience. I guess I didn't do a very good job earlier of highlighting we've developed over 3 gigawatts of projects in things recently. Obviously, we were selected for the city of Cincinnati for their city project, as well as for their aggregation project in a large off-site facility of 100 megawatts. And we've done this for the city of Houston also. And I mentioned the 2 of those because both of them had a third-party provider involved. And so the experience that we learned in Houston of how to deal with a 3-party agreement between a provider of the electricity, the city, and ourselves as the developer was very useful for transferring that over, as Cincinnati has been trying to develop a way to balance those 3 things as well. So NDAs are crucial. The second part of it being project labor agreements, that's really dependent on, again, what the person offering the RFP is trying to achieve. If the end goal is the absolute lowest cost, whoever the EPC is that we utilize to develop the project, they will source the labor in whatever fashion that they need to, whether that be through union or whether that is non-union labor. They'll bring in the people that are qualified to do the project. If in fact it is important to have it done through union labor, we very definitely enter into PLAs. The most complex of those was one we did for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which was a 5-way PLA, so that all 5 major unions were represented and had workers participating and getting a share of the work to be done and divided up. And then smaller projects usually have 1 or 2. As far as permits, I'll let that for someone else.
Yeah, I could briefly, with regard to permitting, the short answer is it depends. It depends on the project size. Typically, depending on your jurisdiction, a specific project size will trigger a threshold that requires a different permitting regime. In the state of Ohio, for example, any project over 49.9 megawatts is under the jurisdiction of the Ohio Power Siting Board, and then subject to their pretty rigorous environmental and comprehensive permitting regime that roughly takes 9 to 12 months. So it really depends. The smaller the project size, typically the under that state permitting threshold, it can impact your timeline. That's why I mentioned it depends on the project. So for example, if a municipality is interested in a large offsite facility, as you craft your RFP, that has to be taken into consideration in terms of how long you can expect to have your megawatts online, whether it's a project that's in the process of permitting or completed a permit and has a certificate. It can really depend. So I would say it ultimately will come down on what is the preference of the issuer of the RFP and the timing that they would like to see a project come online.
Thank you, Jared. So another question is around diversity and inclusion. So we're interested in what kind of diversity and inclusion efforts you have been part of your projects.
I could maybe start on this one. I guess I'll say, first of all, just to be frank, the renewable energy space today is overwhelmingly male and white. It's nice to see that this audience has got maybe a little bit more diversity, but typically at conferences or business meetings, you end up seeing that there is a very uniform look to the room, and that has to do with a number of factors. So when you're asking in your RFPs for these types of initiatives, it can sometimes be frustrating to see the results. But what I will say is we have seen recently some requests from companies asking for, is there any contractor or subcontractor that could be a women-owned or minority-owned business? And we always say, of course, we will attempt to do that. But it's also helpful to know the priorities, because if you tell us that local labor is more important than diversity, then we'll take that into account. Both of those things can be important, but it's helpful to prioritize if there is something that's of particular interest to you. We also have in the past done a lot with previous veterans who are labor on projects or are supporting projects. Apex has hired a lot of actually Army veterans that now operate our assets either in the field or from here in Charlottesville, and our CEO is also a veteran. So there's a lot of military experience that we typically say is something that's a little bit different than, we have no answer for that. Like I said, it is somewhat challenging, but we do answer the sort of demographics questions as well. We'll sometimes say, tell us about your workforce today. Tell us about what you've done in the last 24 months. And when you look at hiring 3-4 years ago, it's very different from today. There's a much more concerted effort to bring in talent from universities that's much more diverse. And fortunately, these programs in universities are evolving so that there are more opportunities for people who previously didn't have them. So we're seeing that field expand a lot. It typically has not been the top priority for a lot of purchasers, but it is something to consider and try to prioritize to the extent that you can.
Awesome.
Could I add just one more comment on the end of Eric's there, because I think we found that exact same thing. Some of the RFPs have asked for more than just a good faith effort. LA actually has you run job fairs. They have you put it out there and publicize it. You have to show a certain amount of effort over time as to what you have done in order to solicit WME participation in the program. City of Houston made you actually track all of it. Who have you solicited? Who have you talked to? What were their answers? The thing that becomes interesting, though, is if they are not a large-scale business, the city may have requirements on things such as minimum insurance amounts, bonding, might have things for financial strength. And some of the times that knocks out the very people you're trying to reach out to with the smaller business enterprises, because they're not able to meet some of the financial thresholds that are being required by the city for the contracting side to get comfortable, and inadvertently eliminating some of the people that you'd like to have participate. That was all.
Thank you, Greg.
You triggered me to just say one tiny quick thing, which is we also prioritize when we are on a site and constructing that site to use local food and like hotel supplies to the extent we can from businesses that are in these kind of special categories, because that is something that's really easy when you say you've got 300 folks on site building a wind farm. Well, what are they going to eat? There's got to be a way to spread some of the economic development that's going to come out of that, for at least for the 12 months or the 8 months we're on site, to be more broad about and considered about how we do that.
Thank you, Eric. So since we only have 5 minutes left and we still have a lot of questions we collected before, so I like to ask all the cities and counties in this meeting room. So what questions you want to ask developers right now, and the biggest questions you have?
Hi, yes, my question was about what happens at the end of the 15 to 25 years of the PPA agreement, if your panels then become owned by the city or county, or if there are other ways that should be written into the RFP.
Generally, the answer to that is no. There's one of maybe two typical outcomes. One is that there's going to be some type of investor group that paid to actually construct the project, and so they'll own the project for the full life. And once your contract expires, they will go out and say, well, should we continue to operate this project and sell into the local power market, or should we enter another contract with another off-taker or counterparty? And that largely depends on the economics at the time, but that's pretty typical. If it's a utility that owns the project, it's kind of the same thing. They're going to probably turn and say, how can we make the best use of this resource until the project is decommissioned. However, I'll say there are also some contracts I've seen that have purchase options. And so you may be an off-taker and have a fixed price PPA, and up until some certain end of year in the contract, it could be 1 year, it could be 10 years, it could be the end of the contract itself, you have the option to purchase the project at a known residual price so that you can decide if you'd like to be a project owner. The challenge there is that, of course, you're probably not going to have the capabilities to operate these projects. So you would need to ensure you could hire an asset management group, an operations team, or retain the team from the project owner originally.
Awesome. So any other important questions? Any cities and county think are we need to address before we enter the individual work time?
Yeah, my question is in the bottom right, or is one of my questions. I think, I won't speak for the other localities on the call, but I think we have some pretty ambitious renewable energy and emissions reduction goals, and we know we're not going to get it all done in one project. In fact, we're looking for a relatively small proof of concept project to get the key decision makers in our locality comfortable with that as an instrument. What would you recommend as a good proof of concept project for a local government?
I would say rather than building a standalone project and a small one, which can be much more expensive on a megawatt basis, it would be to look for someone who is building a larger project and to be able to contract for a portion of it. It gets you through the whole contracting phase. Oftentimes it is further along in the permitting, it's further along in the process. So it's a quicker sale for you too, to see the steps to get you to where you want to be at. It gives you an opportunity to see what the pricing, the benefits, the environmental attributes are, and the financial side of it. So I think a small part of a larger project is one of the best places that you can enter the market.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Craig.
Sure.
Any other questions?
If we still have time, yeah, if we still have time, I'm curious to hear about, from the developer standpoint, with for localities, especially in terms of being able to hedge our price risk. Do you have a preference for a straight per kilowatt hour sort of rate, or if like a collar, like how, from a developer perspective, does that change, like, I guess, like the ease for you in terms of responding to RFPs?
I can maybe give the example from a developer that we don't typically retain 100% ownership of our projects once they're operating. We do operate most of them, and sometimes we'll keep a small equity stake, but we're not really capitalized to spend $3 billion a year and then actually own all of those. We have to sell down our interests to help recoup some of that expenses. So as a result of that, it means that when we're offering PPA pricing or all kinds of different commercial structuring, we're not necessarily the benefactors of those deals. So we have to be sure that we are putting forward commercial terms that are acceptable to a large potential pool of investors. And we also have to make sure that there is a particular investor on these projects we haven't talked about yet, but tax equity, the providers of the capital that have a sufficient US tax bill that they can monetize or take advantage of tax credits. And so those are usually really big institutional investment banks like JP Morgan and Bank of America and other entities of the like. And so we're having to negotiate contract terms that are going to be acceptable to them. When you think about, gosh, a collar, that could be really complicated, and all those banks might have diverging views about how they view the value of that collar. If I put a floor price and a ceiling price and those things are too narrow or too wide or too high or too low, it could just be very confusing. And so from a pricing perspective, it is more challenging for us to provide that product than a standard flat price or an escalating price product. But I will say there's a lot of innovation in the space, and more recently, we've been pricing a lot of contracts that have a protection for us, a floor. So you agree to pay a minimum price, and anytime the price is above that, we keep some of the value and we give you a discount. So you end up giving away some of the economic benefit in the form of that extra payment, but in exchange for that, we take a lot more risk. And we found success recently with structures like that. It's just that a full collar, if folks know what I'm talking about with that, is pretty risky for a project to offer, typically at the stages when we're making offers.
Thank you, Eric. So because I only have a limited time, we have to move on to the next session, which is an individual city or county work time. But at the same time, all the developers will stay in the main room with us. So if you have any question when you fill out your RFP template, just feel free to request for help, and we can send one of our faculty or one of the developers to your breakout room to answer any questions you have.